Hello everybody, welcome to Snyder's Inc. And today we have got a tough video, and this is one unsolved mystery from every state. It's going to be long, this is an hour-long video. We're going to get right into it, ladies and gentlemen. Hit the like button, subscribe button, comment what you think down below. If you'd like to help the channel with a donation, you can leave a super thanks. Or, link to our PayPal's in the description. Let's go.
From murders that were never solved, unexplained disappearances, someone getting hit on the head and losing their appetite forever, to meat falling from the sky, grave diggers, and so much more. Join me today as we talk about one unsolved mystery from every state. The last one did extremely well, so this is now a series, but these take so much time, so if you like the video, I'd appreciate if you actually click the like button. And if you're not subscribed, don't even worry about that, I'll earn your subscription by the end of this video. And now, let's get started. Washington. From brain injury to sudden math genius. Although there's a scientific explanation, there's one really mysterious case from Tacoma, Washington, where a man, Jason Paget, turned into a mathematical genius after being savagely attacked outside of a karaoke bar. Paget said all he recalled was being knocked out for a split second and seeing a bright flash of light. He would later get diagnosed with a severe concussion at a local hospital, though he wasn't admitted. After a while, he began suffering from PTSD and had lots of social anxiety, but then also noticed that he started seeing things differently. He'd see lines connecting things in real time, and also amazingly, this new vision came with a god-level ability to draw mathematical shapes and sketches. Even better still, he suddenly understood complex math, particularly geometry, and even began knowing what he liked or disliked in the math world. This was of course far from his pre-injury mind, where he says he barely cracked pre-algebra math in school and cheated his way through tests. Interestingly, this seemed
That's awesome. So he went from a guy who cheated through tests and barely be able to do anything in math to being able to successfully just complete math equations and draw math stuff, and that with ease. That is insane. What an interesting thing that could happen through your brain as a result of a injury.
seemingly puzzling condition turned out to be a very rare case that a psychologist, Bear Brigard, described as the acquired savant syndrome. Basically, the injury lit up parts of the brain responsible for understanding things like math. It still remains quite mysterious how this happens, as there's no controlled way to do it. You can't just hit someone in the head and expect them to suddenly get better at math. Oregon. Ghosts of Highway 20. The 1970s were pretty wild years in the US. Now, about 900 miles away in Newport, Oregon, something arguably way worse was happening. There was a, quote, ghost serial killer on Highway 20. These suspicions had been set in motion by the October 1992 discovery of two sets of skeletal remains just off the highway in an isolated wooded area. It would later be established that these remains were those of two girls who had gone missing earlier that year. Sheila Swanson, age 19.
Is it not possible that there's just a serial killer? Why does it have to be ghost? What makes it ghost-related?
And Melissa Sander, age 17. The two had been on a camping trip, and while the specific causes of death were not stated, the medical examiner believed there was foul play involved. The case did go cold, however there were a few other discoveries of other victims which set everything back in motion. In 1994, for instance, the skull of Kelly Disney, a 17-year-old that had disappeared in 1984, was found with a man who had picked it up at a well-known local spot. Someone had dumped it there. Disney had disappeared along Highway 101, and strangely, two other girls, Jennifer Essen and Cara Lige, both age 16, had vanished on the same highway, only for their bodies to be found in a wooded area near Newport. Initially, the police believed there was a single perpetrator involved, but then both John Arthur Ackroyd, a highway mechanic, and Bobby Jack Fowler, a known criminal, became primary suspects. The evidence leaned more towards Ackroyd, but then he died before the case could be tried. Overall, no one knows for sure what happened to all those girls, and if indeed these two suspects were the ghosts of Highway 20. California.
Okay, so it wasn't it was actual ghosts. It's just two people who could not be found that just murdered people and disappeared into the night. Got it.
Yeah, the Zodiac Killer. So by now I'm sure you've noticed the order of the states, and I actually forgot to say that at the intro, but we'll leave it here. And basically we're going in columns from left to right downwards. These arrows on the screen should help, but it's literally just like one urban legend from every state. It's the same format and the same order. Anyway, let's continue with California. The Zodiac Killer is considered one of the most prolific.
Good old Zodiac Killer. I had a theory on this at one point. Had a theory.
Serial murderers in the US, having terrorized people in the San Francisco area between the 1960s and 70s. Whoever the killer was, they were directly tied to 5 murders and 2 attempted murders, but claimed responsibility for at least 37 murders. Now, unlike most serial killers, Zodiac had a pretty unique MO where they taunt authorities with complex ciphers. The Zodiac killer would send these to newspapers and law enforcement. The victims were either shot or stabbed. In general, the methods were so interesting that they ended up inspiring books, documentaries, and movies like Zodiac and Dirty Harry. More than 4 decades later though, the killer has never been accurately identified. And I'm using accurately because in 2021, a group of private investigators called the Casebreakers claimed with great confidence they had narrowed the murders to a guy who had passed on in 2018, Gary Francis Post. Their discovery was however not endorsed by the police, as the Homicide Cold Case Unit at the Riverside Police Department stated that the case was still open, even asking for anyone with new information to refer to the FBI. So the case is still unsolved.
Did they look into the guy? Because at least would look into it. Or did they just immediately shut it down because it wasn't done by them?
Alaska. Murders abroad the investor. In September of 1982, Alaska witnessed what would come to be known as the worst unsolved crime to date. In the tiny fishing village of Craig, a killer, only described as a white male in his early 20s, is said to have acted in plain sight, using a .22 caliber pistol or rifle to shoot and kill 8 people on a boat in the early hours of a Monday morning. These included the unofficial boat's captain, 28-year-old Mark Colthurst, and his wife Irene, also 28, as well as their kids, Kimberly, age 5, and John, age 4, and 4 crew members. The crew members consisted of 19-year-olds Mike Stewart, Dean Moon, and Jerome Keown, as well as 18-year-old Chris Heyman. Hours later, the killer then apparently moved the 58-foot fishing boat, known as Investor, to a secluded bay about a mile outside town. And rather chillingly, he did so very nonchalantly, even waiting to a nearby skipper as the vessel took off. He then used the Investor's skiff, those tiny one-man boats, to come back to land. Then the next day, in the afternoon, he went back to the Investor armed with gasoline, set it ablaze, sped back to town, and disappeared for good. And almost 42 years later, there hasn't been a single trace that could lead us back to this person.
Hey, look. That killer knew what it was doing. It knew how to get in and get right back out. It knew exactly how to do it. It knew what it was doing.
Idaho. Cult killings. There were some strange incidents where bodies, human and animal, were found in some regions of Idaho mutilated and drained of blood. The only explanation from the sheriff's department was that these were cult killings, but then there was no evidence to justify the same. Among the first of these incidents was the discovery of the body of a man in 1979 in the Bliss and Jerome area. The body was naked, except for underpants, and was mutilated, sexual organs missing, and sliced off lips. Strangely, although found in rugged terrain, the soles of his feet did not look like those of someone who walked the terrain. There were also no tracks, animal or human, where he was found. It also turned out that that specific area was known for a couple of UFO reports before. Then, in 1989, 2 cattle belonging to 2 different ranchers were found and killed on the same night. They had their sexual organs removed, bodily fluids drained, and even weirder, patches of their hide had been surgically removed.
Okay, I will admit, that sounds very cult-like. But I don't know why they go after animals and people doing the same thing. That's kind of weird.
Use the term surgically very loosely there. And just like the body in the desert, there were no track marks, tire or human, anywhere near the cattle. Other mutilations would then be reported a while later, but still no one knew what was causing them. Close to 45 years later, we still have no clue other than the cult killings explanation. Nevada. Who killed Tupac? Probably one of the most talked about Nevada murder mysteries is the drive-by shooting of 25-year-old Tupac Shakur on the night of September 7th.
Is this still unsolved? I know this was 2 months ago. But is this still unsolved? This is pretty... unless I'm wrong, pretty much solved, isn't it? Like, they can't do more with it, but isn't it pretty much solved?
7th, 1996. This happened at a stoplight on East Flamingo Road, when a white 4-door Cadillac pulled up beside the BMW Tupac was in, belonging to Marion Suge Knight, the then CEO of Death Row Records, and then the occupants opened fire from a 40 Glock 22. Shakur was hit 4 times and would succumb to the injury 6 days later at the hospital. Now in that Cadillac from which shots were fired was a man named Dwayne Kef D. Davis, a known gangster, and his nephew, Orlando Anderson. Anderson. These two became the primary suspects because earlier that evening, Tupac and Anderson had been in a fight. Anderson would end up dying in a shooting 2 years later, but then just last year, Davis got arrested and charged for murder. That's more than 3 decades since the shooting. Now, based on a statement he gave to the police, it was Anderson who apparently shot Tupac, but then the police maintained that it was Davis who was a shot caller and the supplier of the weapon. The case will be tried in November of this year. In the meantime, it remains mysterious as to what actually transpired between those involved and the true motive of the killing. Utah, the grave robber. There's a very bizarre story from Salt Lake City where in the 1800s a guy got convicted of grave robbing and was banished to an island where he somehow vanished and was never seen again. The man, Jean Baptiste, was a gravedigger by profession and lived with his wife, Dorothy Jennison. They lived in a small house near the cemetery. Nothing had seemed odd about him until 1862 when one of the men shot and killed for beating up the governor, John Dawson, was exhumed only to be found naked and buried face down. This happened after the man's family, the Clausens, had come to claim his body after it had already been buried by an officer, that officer being Henry Heath. Now, Heath insisted that's not how he buried the man, that man being named Marani Clausen, but Marani's brother would hear none of it. So they started investigating and finally, someone told them to talk to Baptiste. Shockingly, they found the clothing Marani had been buried in, alongside many other clothing articles from about 300 victims. Baptiste begged for his life, and though he wasn't killed, he was banished to a small island that was being used by a family, the Miller family, to feed their cattle. 6 weeks later though, when the Miller brothers went back to the island, Baptiste was gone. No one knew for sure where he went, but it was suspected that he escaped in a makeshift raft and made his way to Montana. The confusion around his escape, or death, had some hunters discovering a human skull around the area in 1890. Then began a legend that his ghost would be seen off the shores on the lake. Pretty mysterious. Arizona. There's a really strange case from Mesa, Arizona, where an 11-year-old Mikkel Biggs vanished from her home on January 2nd, 1999, never to be seen again. 25 years later, nothing had come up and no one really knows what happened, but her family hasn't given up hope. They even talked to the media earlier this year, describing what happened right before Mikkel was taken. Her sister, Kimber Biggs, says that it all must have taken about 90 seconds. How so? Well, the two sisters and the other neighborhood kids had been playing just a few feet from their home, near the intersection of Toltec and El Morro in Mesa. They were waiting for the ice cream truck as well. This was late in the evening, and since the sun had begun to set and the kids were tired of waiting, everyone started heading back to their homes. Kimber told Mikkel they should head in as well, but she refused. Kimber went on without her, but as soon as she stepped into their house, their mom told her to go back and get Mikkel. She walked back down the driveway, calling out for her sister, but there was no response. Just her bike lying on the road with one tire spinning. Now, while Dee Blaylock, a convicted sexual predator, has been the primary suspect, there's been no evidence to convict him, as, again, no one really knows what happened. Montana.
Okay, so this is the only situation I can believe. He had to have been watching them from the beginning of them being out there. Because there's no way that guy would have happened. Because I'm going to assume the guy they have as a suspect is the guy that did it. But I could be wrong. Whoever it is, there's no way they could have just been happened to drive by in that short period of time. If we're going to say 90 seconds of them going in, turning that, the sister going in, coming back out, and her being gone. There's no way they just happened to drive by at that point. It would have to be they were watching, ready to take her at the moment she got the chance. They got the chance. So I have to believe that's what happened then.
Related cows. The 1970s were definitely some of Montana's strangest years due to a lot of unexplained phenomena. Cattle mutilations in particular featured a lot on this list of weird occurrences. On September 22nd, for example, Keith Wolverton, a deputy at Cascade County Sheriff's, was quite shocked when he was called to a scene where, unlike what he'd seen before, the mutilated cattle had missing udders and sexual organs. And it seemed the cut had been made with a very sharp instrument that left behind edges similar to those from pinking shears. The marks were confirmed as not matching any predators. Then, barely a month later, a different cow was found with the tongue and right eye removed. Strangely, the eye had been pulled off from a hole above the skull, with the hole being suspected to have been made by something like a laser as it left burn marks. More such mutilations would go on to be reported between 1975 and 76, and even later. The cattle would mostly have sexual organs removed in strange ways, with no evidence of it being an actual predator. There were also no tire tracks on the reported cases, which would have suggested human activity. Still, whatever was going down in Montana at the time remains a mystery. Wyoming, Gabby's bones. So picture this. A friend asks to leave a box in your shed for safekeeping, and you, being a good friend, just agree without much thought. 6 years go by.
Wouldn't be that guy. Nope, that wouldn't be me. The moment they said I didn't put this chest in, I'm gonna be like, what's in it? What's in it? And they're gonna be like, why do you need to know what's in it? I'm like, it's going in my damn shed. I need to know what's in it. I ain't playing no games. Show me what the fuck's in it.
And then one day, as you clean out the shed, you decide to peek inside the box because it looks like your friend isn't coming back for it anytime soon. What you find in the box ends up scarring you for life and ends up with you calling your local authorities. You just discovered human bones and a skull that looks like it was shattered by a gunshot. Now, this is the exact story of Newell Sessions from Thermopolis, Wyoming, who had been keeping an old military box for his buddy Gabby. Now, you'd be tempted to think Gabby had something to do with the skull, but you'd be wrong because as investigations revealed, the trunk, the bone, the skull, and the trunk's lock all dated back to the 1930s. Gabby hadn't even been around then. Gabby's only role was dropping it off at Sessions' shed in 1986. The only explanation as to what happened was based on DNA analysis that had revealed the skull was that of Joseph Mulvaney, a man who, according to his daughter, was killed by his brother and buried in the trunk. The police, however, never confirmed the killing part, leaving a lot of mystery in the case.
What do you mean never confirmed the killing part? Like they couldn't confirm that was him? Because he kind of looks like he'd been killed by a gunshot, so I don't think... He clearly did. I don't think his daughter would lie about how he died, like...
Colorado, John Benet Ramsey. The murder of...
Oh, this is the case that has blown my brain for so long. This has been the one me and Chris have just did our own little fucking investigation on. We were years back because this is the case I want to get an answer to so badly, even though I know I never will.
6-year-old John Benet Ramsey on Christmas night of 1997 remains one of Colorado's most sinister murder mysteries. That night, around 5:52 a.m., Patsy Ramsey made a 911 call from their home in Boulder, Colorado, reporting that her daughter, John Benet, had been kidnapped. Backing up her claim was a ransom note showing a demand of $118,000. However, about 7 hours later, the strangled, bludgeoned body of the child was found in a storage room in the family's basement. She had extensive injuries, including a fractured skull. Immediately, Patsy Ramsey and her husband, John, became primary suspects. Why? Well, first, they were the parents. And 2, the responding officer said the two had weird body language for people who had just lost a child in such a gruesome manner. No convictions were made though, as the case dragged on for years, pointing at different people as possible suspects, including 41-year-old John Mark Carr, who confessed to an American investigator about how he drugged, SA'd, and accidentally killed John Benet, and also Burke Ramsey, John Benet's brother. There was a lot of back and forth between the police department and the district attorney, with disagreements on who to pursue and convict. Still, years later, with 1,500 pieces of evidence and 1,000 DNA samples, no conviction has been made. As recently as 2023, this remains an active case being worked on in a collaboration between the Boulder Police Department, the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, and the Colorado Cold Case Review Team.
If that case ever gets solved, I think it'll be one of the quickest videos I ever make, because I'll be like, I need to read everything.
New Mexico, West Mesa Bone Collector. One of the largest homicide cases to ever happen in New Mexico is the discovery of the remains of 11 women and one unborn child in an REO bank on Albuquerque's West Mesa. This all started when a woman discovered a bone while walking her dog, and as the police began probing, they ended up finding the multiple bodies along the 100-acre piece of undisturbed land. Eventually, the investigation would reveal that these bodies had been dumped there between 2001 and 2005. Satellite images showed tire marks in undisturbed soil from 2003 to 2005. Also, it was determined that these women, mostly Hispanic and aged between 15 and 32, were to a larger extent involved with drugs and sex work. Now, 15 years later, the police have never made an arrest despite extensive efforts that include a $100,000 reward for information and sharing photos of 6 other women thought to be related to the case. The standing theory is that all these victims were struck by one person, a serial killer simply referred to as the West Mesa Bone Collector. Worth noting also is that this case is very much active and ongoing, since as recently as February of this year, investigators were calling out for anyone with information to share it, hoping it would.
So they have 11 found, and 8 they're trying to identify. So they got 19 they believe all associated with this.
would at least ease the pain of the affected families by serving them justice. Currently, they have accumulated about 1,400 tips over the last 15 years. Hawaii. Lisa Au. The strange murder of 19-year-old Lisa Au, a 19-year-old hairdresser at the Susan Beer Salon in Kailua, Oahu Island in Hawaii, is one of Hawaii's more popular unsolved mysteries. Lisa is said to have gone missing on the night of January 20th, 1982, on her way from her sister's apartment in Mikiki, about half an hour from Kailua. She had gone there to meet her boyfriend, Doug Holmes, after leaving work around 9 p.m. They had dinner and she headed home despite a heavy rainstorm, and this was the last time she'd been seen alive. Her parents, Patrice and Chester Au, raised an alarm when she didn't make it home, even calling her boyfriend, and soon after a search began. First to be found was her car, a 1976 Toyota. It was on the Moana-Wili Highway, flooded with about 2 inches of water, with the driver's seat completely drenched. 10 days later, on January 31st, her naked body was found at a ravine near Tantalas Drive, about 3 miles from her sister's apartment. A jogger found it, and according to him, it looked like it had been dumped there. The case turned into a homicide investigation, but no one ever got convicted due to lack of evidence. The suspects changed with time and included the boyfriend, a police officer, or someone pretending to be a police officer. Still, it remains a mystery how Lisa ended up dead, dumped 40 feet down a ravine. North Dakota. Bodies in the crawl space. In 1904, a man by the name of Eugene Butler, a resident of the Niagara area who loved his solitary life, was committed to the state asylum in Jamestown. He'd suffered mental illnesses, for instance having hallucinations, claiming people were chasing him, and riding on horseback at nighttime while screaming his lungs out. He stayed at the asylum, receiving treatment for 7 years, before passing on in 1911. Now, nothing had seemed odd at the time other than the mental illness, but that quickly changed when his house was being excavated to allow for the estate to be divided among the surviving relatives. Leo Verbellen, one of the workmen, went in a hidden trap door in the crawl space. He discovered human skeletons. Authorities were notified, and further excavation revealed that there had been a total of 6 skeletons. Even weirder, all 6 skulls were cracked at the back, suggesting that they were probably knocked out the back of the head and then killed. Or maybe that hit was the thing that killed them. 2 had broken legs. It was suspected that Butler had been responsible, but he was already dead. He couldn't be convicted. Also, since no one had been reported missing in the area, it was assumed that the remains belonged to transient farmhands or similar persons. This would actually have been clarified by DNA tests, but then some of the bones actually got stolen back when word spread around. The whole thing thus remains mysterious.
How the fuck do you not make sure the bones don't get stolen? You just tape the bones. You make it so you can't. Oh, you tape up where the crawl space is so nobody knows. How the fuck does this get caught so easily?
South Dakota. The mysterious accident near Lake Andes. On December 11th, 1992, a young couple, Arnold Archambault, age 20, and Ruby Brugiere, age 18, tired from parenting duties, decided to take a break and enjoy the night at a local club scene. They took their baby, who was a few months old, to their uncle for caretaking and then left with their cousin, 17-year-old Tracy Dion, for a night of partying. When they got back the next morning, their uncle noticed they were still drunk, so he asked them to go home first, sleep it off, and then come back for the baby. Sadly, that's the last time he had seen the couple. It turns out that as Archambault took a turn at the intersection of Route 281, the car slid on black ice and overturned. According to Dion, their cousin, she never saw Archambault leave the car and only woke up to Brugiere struggling to open the door and then leave. Dion remained stuck and waited for the rescuers, and though they got her out, by then, Archambault and Brugiere were nowhere to be seen. This was on December 12th, 1992, and for weeks, locals and the police scoured the area looking for the couple, but nothing ever came up. It didn't help also that there were icy waters all around. Lake Andes was just 1 mile away. It wasn't until March of 1993 that the bodies would be found. The first body to be found was Brugiere's, and it had been so badly decomposed that a tattoo was the only thing that could be used to identify her. The body lay on a ditch by Route 281. This prompted a further search of the area, and as they pumped—
Sorry, that yawn wasn't thing. I've been up since like 5 in the morning, so yeah, I'm very tired.
The water out of a nearby depression, Archambault's was found. It had been buried about 4 feet under the water, but surprisingly, it was way less decomposed than that of Brugiere. The case remains unsolved, and it's believed the couple were murdered elsewhere and dumped on the spot. Unfortunately, we might never know for sure. Nebraska, the dead math professor. There's a rather strange case from Shadron, Nebraska, where in 2007, a 46-year-old math professor, Stephen Hataja, was found dead, burned, and tied to a tree in a southeastern remote part of the Shadron town. It was determined that he'd gone missing on December 4th, 2006, and it wasn't until 95 days later, on March 9th, 2007, that a man working on a ranch found him while chasing a runaway bull. Now, a lot of mystery surrounded his death, so much so that it became difficult to rule out homicide and suicide. Hatasha's friend, Tim Sorensen, had for instance told the police that Hatasha had a history of depression and even got hospitalized for it. He had also tried to a year prior. Also, around the tree where he'd been found, there were no signs of any person having been around, just a nearly empty bottle of peppermint schnapps near his body. However, some people speculated that he might have been a victim of a hate crime, possibly due to his sexual orientation, although all background information pointed to him being heterosexual. What was for sure though was that he died of smoke and soot inhalation, as well as thermal injuries, and that his body showed an extremely elevated blood alcohol level. Regardless, with no clarity on what exactly went down, the case remains one of Nebraska's strangest mysteries. Kansas. Randy Leach's disappearance. As recently as 2023, the mysterious disappearance of Randy Leach after a high school pre-graduation party is still trying to be solved. Leach went missing in 1988, having been last seen in the morning hours of April 16th at a party in rural Leavenworth County. Apparently no one saw him leave, and since then, neither he nor his mother's 1985 Dodge 600 with license plate number LVJ8721 have ever been found. This is despite extensive search efforts that include recent posters with QR codes and even a standing $25,000 reward for information. What's even stranger is that at the time of his disappearance, there had been rumors of a satanic cult in the Leavenworth area. Some even thought he might have been part of a ritual sacrifice. Also, word was that the party site, Irwin Farm, had been cleaned spotless by the time the police began investigating, and then, not long after, the Irwin house burned to the ground. It also didn't help that Steve Doherty, the last person to have seen Randy the night he disappeared, died sometime later. And he wasn't the only one to have cooperated with investigators and turned up dead. Several other odd things also happened later.
This is fascinating. Okay, so this is a guy who, he died. He disappears. Randy Leach disappears. And then anyone who cooperates with the police and tries to figure out where he is just has ended up dead. That's insane.
Like the replacement car the Leaches got, catching fire and burning in their backyard. And although they made the case even more mysterious, the search is still going with no evidence, and the police never ruled it as a homicide. Oklahoma. A family's death in Oklahoman mountainsides. There's a very strange case that happened in 2009 where a family
I know this one. Yep, I've heard of this one.
Of three, Bobby Jameson, age 44, his wife, Sherilyn Jameson, age 40, and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison, vanished somewhere in the remote mountains of South Oklahoma. The family had traveled to the Sands Boys Mountains to view a 40-acre plot that they were looking to buy that October and located from their lakefront property in Eufaula. They had actually done the viewing twice, only that the second time they never returned home. As a search ensued, the first thing to be found 8 days later was their white pickup truck, which strangely had their phones, car keys, GPS, and $32,000 in cash. Their dog, Maisie, nearing its death, was also found inside the vehicle. These discoveries caused the search to be intensified, with over 100 men scouring the area with dogs, horses, and even a drone, but still, nothing came up. It wasn't until 4 years later that the skeletal bodies would be found in a remote mountainside, lying face down in the dirt, side by side in a line. Till today, no one really knows what happened to them, with speculations claiming all sorts of things, including witchcraft, drug deal gone wrong, murder, suicide, meth use, white supremacists, and even accidental death. Family and friends, however, remain convinced that some sort of foul play was involved. Sadly, we may never find out. Texas. Murders at Lover's Lane. One summer night in 1990, a young couple, Andy Atkinson, age 21, and Cheryl Henry, age 22, went to the Bayou Mamas nightclub on Westheimer at South Gessner, Texas. And unfortunately, that was the last time they'd ever be seen alive. They had soon after left for a remote spot in West Houston, known as Lover's Lane. Nothing had seemed odd at first, but then when Cheryl didn't make it back home by the next morning, her family called the police and a search began. The first sign that something was wrong was Andy's white car being found at the 1300 block of Enclave with Cheryl's purse and shoes inside. Search dogs were then sent into the woods, and what would be discovered was as shocking as it gets. Andy's body was found near a tree, almost completely decapitated. The killer had then used Andy's golf club and golf balls to point where Cheryl's body was, nearby hidden under wooden boards. The body was naked, with the throat cut and with signs she'd been SA'd. According to the detectives, it seemed Andy had been tied up to the tree first and made to listen as Cheryl was being assaulted and killed killed before being killed as well. Upon further investigation,
Oh, that's evil right there. That is as evil as it gets. You tie them up and have their boyfriend have to listen to you being sexually assaulted, then they kill you and then kill him? That's insane.
it was suspected that the attacker was someone known to them based on a few pieces of evidence such as a knife being used for the murder, and the fact that the killer guided the police to Cheryl's body. The killer's identity, however, remains unknown to date. What's known though is that they were responsible for another murder, an exotic dancer raped 2 months before this young couple was killed. The DNA at both crime scenes matched, but then it wasn't in the national DNA database, so it couldn't be tied to a specific person. Minnesota. The disappearance of Josh Guimond. On the night of November 9th, 2002, at around 11:45 p.m., Josh Guimond, a student at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, left a party hosted in one of the dormitories, the Menton Court building, never to be seen again. He was last spotted at the Stump Lake Bridge, which is between the building where the party was and his dormitory, St. Mar. This was around 12:15 a.m. More than 22 years later, the search is still on, though he is presumed dead. Last year, he was featured in a Netflix documentary, Unsolved Mysteries, and as more people learned of his story, the police apparently also shared more information and received more tips, but then this also meant that more theories came up regarding his disappearance. For example, after police shared a photo collage of 28 unidentified men from Guimond's computer, some suspected that he might have been exploring his sexuality and thus been killed in an online date gone wrong. Another theory is that he might have been abducted, since within months of his disappearance, there had been multiple kidnappings of young college men who would later be found dead in nearby bodies of water. There are also those who thought he might have accidentally died, maybe as a result of being too intoxicated, and his death covered up by other students. Still, none of these theories carry solid evidence. It's all just speculation. It remains a mystery as to what exactly happened to him. Iowa. The body with no appetite. In 2014, the story of Landon Jones came up in the media, and it remains one of Iowa's strangest mysteries. Landon, age 12 at the time, simply went to bed one day and woke up the next day absolutely with no urge to eat or drink, and with no sense of hunger or thirst. He apparently was so dizzy, nearly passing out. The parents, Michael and Debbie Jones, also realized he had a cough from a clogged chest. Luckily, he got treated for the bacterial infection in his chest, which caused the clogging, but still he never recovered in the sense of getting his appetite back. In fact, within a year, he'd gone from 104 pounds to 68.4 pounds in body weight. Also, so rare was his condition that he was thought of as the only person in the world to have it. He even got
I'm suspicious. Is he still eating and drinking? Because if he has no urge and he's not eating and drinking, there's no way he's alive a year later. So that has me a bit confused, because he's making it sound like he doesn't eat, or doesn't eat and he never drank. But there's no way he won't be alive a year later. So like, the fuck's going on?
Considered for admission to the National Institutes of Health, which examines the rarest disease cases in the world. Anyway, so far, one of the main attempts at explaining the condition has been by biochemist Sharon Churchill, who thought it could have been due to a zapped hypothalamus, the region of the brain that controls hunger, thirst, and other senses. This might have been caused by an intake of a drug called valproic acid, which Landon had been using for over a year to control his absent seizures. Still, this was just a theory, and since no update exists on the case, there's no way to know if it was for sure the cause. As it stands, therefore, Landon losing the urge to drink or eat remains an unsolved mystery. Missouri. Little Jane.
Does he still have it, or is he dead? Like, he didn't really make it clear if he was actually alive or not still.
Jane Doe. There's a case from St. Louis, Missouri that has puzzled investigators for years, where a decapitated body of a child, suspected to be between 8 and 11 years old, was found in an abandoned building with no evidence identifying either the victim or the killer. The victim, simply referred to as Little Jane Doe, was said to have been the only decapitation in the US that involved a young person at the time. Her head was actually never recovered. Now, the FBI was involved, but despite great efforts to find out who she was, she remains unidentified. Only a few details exist about her, including the sweater she had been wearing, her height, which was 5 feet and 5 inches, that she had a malformed backbone condition, and wore a red nail polish on both hands at the time of her killing. It was also suspected that she might not have been originally from the St. Louis area, meaning she could have grown up elsewhere and moved there, or been killed in another state and dumped in St. Louis. In the end, whatever happened to her remains a mystery. Arkansas. This is a 2-in-1. First up is one of the most famous unsolved mysteries of Arkansas, the Gurdon Light. This is a hovering light in a wooded area by abandoned railroad tracks that have been described as blue, green, white, or orange, and seems to be bobbing as if hanging by a cord. Some believe it's the lantern of the ghost of a railroad worker, William McLean, who died in 1931 after falling into the path of a train, while others think it's an atmospheric reflection of lights of cars passing on the Interstate 30. Some have also tried to link it to the swamp gas and rock quartz of the ground beneath, but no one has a definitive explanation. Another unsolved mystery in Arkansas is the disappearance of 6-year-old Morgan Nick in 1995. It was reported that on June 9th at a ballpark in Alma, an unidentified man in a red truck was seen driving away at the time that Nick disappeared, but it had never been known for sure who took her or where she ended up. And later, Nick's family, to honor her daughter, formed the Morgan Nick Foundation to offer assistance to families of missing children. The Arkansas Alert System for Missing Juveniles was also named after her, the Morgan Nick Alert. Also, ABC's Extreme Makeover Home Edition featured the family in 2012 in an episode focusing on missing children. In the episode, they receive a home makeover. I don't know how the home makeovers and this had anything to do with each other, but I mean, at least they were spreading the word on an episode of television. But yeah, that's really it for that. Let's move on to the next one. Louisiana, the Jennings 8. Between 2005 and 2009, bodies of 8 women from the Jefferson Davis Parish were randomly found in swamps and canals around the Jennings area. The women, both black and white and aged between 17 and 30, were thought to have been murdered, but then their bodies had decomposed quite a bit, so it was difficult to tell for sure. Now, what really complicated this case was that Jennings, being a small town, meant the victims, potential suspects, and even law enforcement all had some sort of ties either by friendship or by being family. So even though prostitution and drugs were thought to be the key contributors of the murders, other suspicions arose. This was also worsened by how the investigation was being done, alongside some other oddities. For instance, a guy named Frankie Richard, a strip joint owner with a history of assault, had been arrested after a woman said she saw him kill one of the victims, Kristen G. Lopez. He was released though after the woman soon recanted her statement. Then, even worse, in 2007, the chief of detectives at the local sheriff's office bought a truck from an inmate at the parish jail, and that inmate was not random. She was an acquaintance of one of the victims. A witness would later say that they saw the victim in the same truck on the day she disappeared. Strangely, by the time the statement was given, the detective had washed and resold the truck. Add that to the fact that the police were...
Why is a police officer flipping a truck from a prison inmate? That should not even be happening. You should not be hustling with a prison inmate. Police are stupid. Really stupid.
Accused of losing evidence, and you can probably see why this case remains a mystery.
Yeah.
It was even thought the police
It's 'cause police don't know how to do their job, apparently, in Louisiana at this point.
were either shielding the killer, or at least one of them was guilty. Wisconsin, drug deal gone wrong? There's a 19-year-old from Madison, Wisconsin, whose case was almost ruled as a died before his parents looked closer at the facts and found inconsistencies that suggested there had been more to the death. The teen, Chad Marr, was found dead in his car in a garage in Chicago, Illinois, about 2 days after his parents had suspected something was up. Nothing had seemed odd at first, as that day, May 19th, he'd had lunch at his house as usual and left for work. However, when they went by the bike shop where he worked, they couldn't see his car, so they began looking for him. It wasn't until May 21st that they'd be informed by the police of their son's death in Illinois. An autopsy concluded that he died from carbon monoxide poisoning. That conclusion would quickly change though, because as the family was viewing his body, they discovered injuries on his knuckles and face, and when they looked at the clothes he'd been wearing, there was a clear bloodstain on the shirt. This prompted further investigation, which confirmed their worries. Marr had likely been murdered. The autopsy report, for instance, said he had a carbon monoxide concentration of 74%, which could only make sense if he'd inhaled it while already unconscious. Also, there was a jean jacket in his car that couldn't be explained. Anyway, as the story spread around, an anonymous tip came in claiming that Marr had been involved in a drug deal with his neighbors back in Madison. It was thus suspected that his death was a drug deal gone wrong. It, however, remains unclear if that was the actual reason or if something else had been at play. Illinois, the Mad Gasser. In the 1940s, the town of Mattoon, Illinois.
Holy shit, that looks awesome. I'm not even gonna lie. This looks insanely sick. This should be in a horror movie. This is insanity. This looks awesome and insane.
Illinois, experienced about 21 incidents of gas attacks on people's homes, and to date, not only is the attacker still unknown, but also the actual methods they used. For the most part, this attacker, aka the Mad Gasser, would sort of blow gas into the victims' homes, as most who reported to the police said they first smelled an odor before experiencing symptoms like paralysis, coughing, nausea, and vomiting. These would go away though after about 2 hours. Other attacks though, such as that of a couple, Carl and Beulah Cords of North 21st Street, had a different twist. The attacker left a white cloth dabbed in an unknown chemical on the couple's front door. When Mrs. Cords got curious and smelled it, she immediately became paralyzed, and the damage became so bad that her lips were swollen, cracked, and bleeding, and the roof of her mouth seared. Now, as I mentioned, the attacker remains unknown. The closest the police got to a suspect was a man they picked up near Mrs. Cords' home right after she reported the incident, but then the man was released after saying he was simply lost. As for the explanation, experts, for instance, local commissioner of public health Thomas V. Wright, believed it was all mass hysteria, maybe fueled a little bit by the effects of toxic waste in the air from nearby industries. That, however, wasn't backed by solid proof, so it might as well fit in the other countless theories,
I wouldn't buy that at all.
including attacks by extraterrestrial beings. Michigan. There are lots of questionable UFO sightings, and so when the government admits that a particular event really happened and remains unexplained, people feel vindicated. One such case is that of Jack Bushong, who while working at the National Weather Service in 1994, helped track one particular sighting using radar equipment at his disposal. According to him, a report that the government released in 2021 saying indeed there were unidentified objects no one could explain is like a big "I told you so" to anyone who doubted or discredited him. The specific incident he was involved in was back in March of 1994 when people called 911 reporting things in the sky flickering like Christmas lights. The lights, varying between blue, red, white, and green, were from 5 or 6 objects with cylindrical shapes floating around in different counties in Michigan, including Ottawa and Muskegon. Now, although no one knew what exactly was going on, the initial observations by Bushong, including his comments on radar data showing objects hovering, jumping, and moving erratically over Lake Michigan, were discredited by other experts. That's why he felt the report vindicated him. Still, there was no clarity on what exactly those lights in the sky were. Some thought it was a top-secret US aircraft, others thought it was just mass hysteria, and others believed it to be a biblical sign of end times. Before we continue with the list, I do want to say, if you haven't liked the video, and if you do like the video, make sure to click the like button. You don't need to subscribe yet. Like I said, you can do that at the end when you know, like, I'm official and I deserve to be in your subscription box. But I also do want to say that these plushies are still on sale. We're down to like our last 20. They're probably going to be sold out with this video right here. But you put him in your cart, you get 20% off any other piece of clothing. And yeah, just thank you guys so much for buying the plushie. It means so much to me. I love reposting some of the pictures you guys tag me in on your story on Instagram. I think they're really funny and cute. You could get your own plushie and your own Earl clothing over at earldoesn'texist.com. With that being said, let's keep going with the list. Indiana. The LaSalle Street Murders. There's a case from Indianapolis, Indiana, where the sheer amount of murder suspects involved made it impossible to solve. The incident in question happened on 1381 North LaSalle Street, where 3 men, Robert Gears, Robert Hinson, and James Barker, were found murdered on the night of December 1st. When the police began investigating, they quickly discovered a complex web of interaction between the 3 and other people, which made the list of possible suspects endless. First, 2 of these men, Gears and Hinson, were in a contest to see who could have sex with the most women, with even a scoreboard with the women's names being used to keep tabs.
Oh, what the fuck? What type of shit? Do they all die from STDs? Because they all probably have them. God, damn it, what a bunch of idiots. Oh, aren't they stupid? Jesus, that's next level fucking idiots.
They'd got into 63. Then the 3 also loved picking up random fights at bars. And on top of that, Hinson and Gears had stolen money from their former boss, Ted Euland. And Euland had apparently taken life insurance policies on the 2, totaling $150,000.
Hold the fuck up. Your boss can take out life insurance on you? That cannot be allowed. Life insurance is becoming my #1 enemy here. Because no one can explain why you can get it. No one can explain to me why you can get it without the people knowing. Nobody can explain to me now how your boss is able to do it on you. That sounds insane. Because even your partner, I still think you should be aware. You should have to prove that they have life insurance on you. You should not be able to not know that someone should not be able to take life insurance out on your death without you knowing. Your boss should not be able to do that, period. There should be no situation I could think of where your boss has life insurance money and should get money if you die. That's insane. That's fucking insane.
These policies were set to expire within a week of the murders, so anyone in any of those circles could have been the murderer. As one officer said, over time they eliminated one suspect and they would bring in 2 more. Now, over the years, various authors and this have claimed to have solved the case, but the Indianapolis Police Department considers it still open. It still remains an unsolved mystery. Kentucky, the meat shower. This definitely sounds like something out of the Twilight Zone, but let's get into it. Yes, there was some sort of meat shower in Bath County, Kentucky in 1876, whose cause has never been properly explained. The incident took place between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. at a farm belonging to the Allen Crouch family. Mrs. Crouch had been out in the yard making soap when a piece of meat began falling around her. And we're not talking about just a couple. No. The description was that they were enough to be a horse wagon full and had been scattered all over, even hanging on the fences. Even weirder, the meat was fresh, although no one knew for sure what kind it was. The 2 neighbors who were daring enough to taste it said it was either mutton or venison, deer's meat. Further tests also claimed it was lung tissue either from a horse or a human infant. Also, the pieces, mostly 2 by 2 inches, were suspected to be from lung, muscle, and cartilage bits of the body, whatever creature's body. Now, the popular explanation was by Joe Walton, a VP at Wildlife Conservation Society, who claimed it might have been vomit from vultures. Apparently, while vultures don't typically vomit, when scared right after a meal, they tend to vomit to line themselves up for a quick flight, and if one does so, the others do too. However, with no solid proof, that remains a theory, and so the meat shower is still a mystery that will probably never get solved. Tennessee, Franklin's only unsolved murder. In the relatively small town of Franklin, Tennessee, there's only one murder that has remained an unsolved mystery 3 decades after it happened. The murder happened at a Hardee's drive-thru along Murfreesboro Road when in February 1991 an unknown man fired at 49-year-old Peggy Cox multiple times at the drive-thru window shortly after he'd been heard making an order on the intercom system. Cox, a widowed mother of 3 who was actually celebrating her birthday that day, had been manning the drive-thru as her son Jude cooked the food in the back. For context, Jude was a cook at the restaurant. Jude said he simply heard gunshots and then saw his mom fall down.
What? So he ordered the food, went to the window, the food wasn't ready yet, obviously, and then the dude just shot up the place because the food wasn't ready? Bro!
Now, what's strange about this case, besides the senseless killing, is that Cox was known as a kind and straightforward person who would never engage in anything immoral. A detective, Matthew...
Oh, I don't think this was targeted. I think this was just a crazy dude who was mad that his food wasn't ready.
Thompson said that she was well-liked, family-oriented, and taking good care of her kids. It was thus surprising that someone would want her dead. Years later, the case remains unsolved, with part of the reason being that back in 1991, things like DNA technology and CCTV were in their infancy, and so not of much use. The family and investigators remain hopeful, though since they have apparently been receiving tips on the case. Mississippi, the Phantom Barber of Pascagoula. In 1942, Pascagoula, Mississippi witnessed what is arguably part of the strangest crimes in US history. A guy, only described by one of his victims as kinda short and fat, was going around sneaking into people's homes at night and cutting off chunks of their hair as they slept. He mostly targeted young girls and women, and it was suspected that he used chloroform to knock them out because one of the victims, Mrs. R.E. Taylor, told the police she had first felt something vaguely passing over her face and then woke up later feeling ill. The only other victim who was sort of awake when the barber invaded was little Mary Evelyn Bridges, who opened her eyes to a figure bending over her with a shiny thing, suspected to be scissors, and messing with her hair. She's actually the one who described the man as short and fat. Now, while mostly all he did was cut chunks of hair, there was also an incident at the home of Terrell Heidelberg where he turned violent, attacking them with an iron pipe. Anyway, many decades later, no one knows who the Phantom Barber was or why he did what he did. The only suspect in the case had been William A. Dolan, a 57-year-old German man, but he was released after passing a lie detector test. Ohio. Letters to Circleville residents. I think this one might be the most interesting one on this list, and I actually do want to make a solo video on this one, Sometime in the future, I probably will. I'm trying to venture off into doing more solo topics, but I'm also going to keep doing these. I just want to do both. Anyway, you're about to find out why I really like this one. Not saying that I like death or stuff like that. It's just an interesting topic. About 25 miles from Columbus, Ohio, there is a tightly knit small town called Circleville. It has been described as the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, and with that kind of trust that would allow people to leave their doors unlocked overnight. It was thus very odd when in 1976, out of nowhere, people began receiving letters taunting them with details about their personal lives. This went on for weeks, with most of the letters containing not only threats of violence delivered in vulgar language and obscene art, but also details that only the recipients knew about. And the letters had no return address, and the senders sort of disguised their handwriting by using block letters. Now, while a lot of people were targeted, one family, that of Ron and Mary Gillespie, was particularly singled out. The author accused Mary of having an affair, and although the couple sailed through those allegations, Ron would die a year later in 1976 from a crash suspected to have been instigated by a call from the author. Investigations were intensified as Ron's brother-in-law, Paul Freshore, ended up being sentenced to 25 years in prison. That solved nothing though, because the letters resumed after a while, and even a TV show, Unsolved Mysteries, got one of their own after airing an episode on the case. So the case remains a mystery, as the author of those letters remains unknown to date. Alabama. Dye brothers and their cousin. On the night of March 4th, 1956, two brothers from Fultondale, Alabama, 19-year-old Billy Howard Dye and 23
Could it have been the family themselves? I mean, they were specifically targeted. They would know if Unsolved Mysteries did one. The crash could just been a crash that happened, but they connect it because it's what happened to them. So they want more attention. They connect it to the guy, to the person, to the author. So it could have been them.
Year-old Robert Earl Dye and their cousin, 38-year-old Dan Brasher from Morris, Alabama, disappeared, never to be seen again. It's said that they were last seen leaving a relative's house in the rural areas of Jefferson County in a green Ford, a 1974 make. Now, because they apparently were heavy drinkers, no one had immediately thought of them as truly missing. I mean, they had already gained a reputation of disappearing for days on drinking binges, so it wasn't until when they surpassed their usual missing days that everyone became concerned. 68 years later, the case remains unsolved. There has been absolutely no trace of them or their car anywhere. At some point though, there were rumors that they could have been killed or buried under a highway. Alabama 78, just about 10 miles north of Birmingham. Treasure hunters Eugene Gray and Joe Martin had identified an object the size of a car underneath the road, prompting drilling crews supervised by local police to dig up debris up to 27 feet down. They just found metal and rubbery material. Oh, and the police's theory was that the three were probably killed over a long feud over moonshine whiskey. Maine, the Whitebird. In 1927, an aircraft known as this on the screen, apparently I always mispronounce something in every video. There's always at least one or two words, but I can't say that. I can't say that one. I'm gonna try, just so I say it, but here you go. An aircraft known as the Loiseau Blanc, or the Whitebird in English, was on a mission to fly from Paris, France to New York in what would have been a daring and historic transatlantic flight. The pilots, Charles Nungesser and Francois Colley, planned to visit the UK, go to the Atlantic Ocean, then Canada before landing in New York. Unfortunately, they never made it. What followed was a wide search that unearthed some evidence, such as people saying they heard them fly over Newfoundland and Ireland, and also that they were heard crashing in Maine in May of that year. Problem though is that both of the pilots and the plane were never found. I mean, there have been claims of bits and pieces being spotted, but no one knows for sure if these were from the plane. In 1947, for example, a lobster fisherman found some pieces that were never officially confirmed by authorities. In 2008, a hunter, Arthur P. Dolan, found some pieces and bones, but again, he never returned to the location or verified if the bones belonged to the missing men. There was even a group that dedicated themselves to a search in 1987, but all they came up with was a wooden stick. Yes, a wooden stick. So, as it stands, the fate of the two men, Nungesser and Colley, remains unknown. New Hampshire, the River Valley Killer. Between 1978 and 1988, there was a serial killer who operated in the Connecticut River Valley, and it actually took a while before investigators figured out that what seemed like random murders were actually connected. First was the discovery of the skeletal remains of 26-year-old Ellen Ruth Fried, and the body of 17-year-old Bernice Quartermach in Newport, New Hampshire, with both victims showing signs of multiple stab wounds. Between these two victims being found though, 36-year-old Linda Moore was also found dead in her living room in Vermont with 25 stab wounds. Then, just 10 days later, another victim with similar wounds was found in the same area, and it was at this point that investigators confirmed the similarity in the killer's MO. A hunt for the suspect ensued, but then it wasn't after the attempted murder of a then pregnant 22-year-old Jane Borowski in August of 1988 that the killing stopped. A man driving a Jeep Wagoneer had apparently attacked her in a parking lot, dragging her from her car and stabbing her a total of 27 times before speeding off, leaving her to die. Borowski managed to drive to a friend's house and eventually got to the hospital. Both her and the baby survived the attack. She then provided authorities with a complete sketch of the attacker, and mysteriously, that was the last time such attacks took place. Unfortunately, by that point, there had been a confirmed 7 victims and many other potential ones. Authorities seem to still be on the case though, because just 4 months ago in May, several search warrants allegedly related to the River Valley murders were executed in Kellyville, Newport. Vermont, the mysterious Bennington Triangle. There's an area in southwestern Vermont known as the Bennington Triangle, a name that pays homage to the infamous Bermuda Triangle where a lot of disappearances have happened. Now, the thing with this area in Vermont is that its unexplained disappearances, suspected to be near 40 so far, are also shrouded in a lot of supernatural, ghostly, and folklore beliefs that blur the line between truth and legend. For example, what has been confirmed for sure is that about 5 people, at least, went missing there between 1945 and 1950, with only the remains of one of them being found. Speculation, on the other hand, has a number as high as 40 and ties the disappearances to different mysterious reasons. Some believe the missing persons are due to UFO-related abductions, cross-dimensional wormholes, and even strange creatures in the woodlands of Glastonbury Mountain. Also, the Glastonbury Mountain area is said to have been cursed, and it was only used by Native Americans strictly as a burial ground. Locals are also said to know of stories of hairy wild men and other strange sightings such as Bigfoot, as well as tales of enchanted stones that swallow people. Massachusetts, the Great Plymouth Mail Truck Robbery. Yes, do you guys appreciate that I said Plymouth and not Plymouth? You know, I was very confused as to a lot of people hating on the way I said Plymouth, but I actually looked it up. I was like, I read it like that looks like it says Plymouth. I'm reading it as it looks. But yeah, I'm gonna say Plymouth now. I get it, guys. Trust me, I get it. I didn't need 1,000 comments telling me that. But one of the most
Angry are we, Mr. Tuvs?
insane robberies in the US took place on August 14th, 1962 on Route 3 in Plymouth, Massachusetts. As reported by newspapers at the time, this was the largest cash heist of all time. The media branded it the Great Plymouth Mail Truck Robbery, and as the phrase suggests, it involves a US mail truck getting robbed. The truck had been on its way to deliver $1.5 million in small bills from Cape Cod to the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston when 2 robbers, armed with submachine guns and dressed as police officers, tied up the driver and the guard and drove around dropping the cash in several places before finally abandoning the truck, which yes included the tied up driver and the guard, in Randolph along Route 128. Interestingly, the robbers were never caught despite great efforts by the US Postal Inspection Service and the FBI. I mean, the 2 bodies aggressively combed New England for clues, even instituting a near total surveillance and harassment on all known robbers in the Boston area. There was also a cash reward of $50,000 for any information leading to arrest, even if the suspects got killed in the process. A further $150,000 was also offered in case the cash was recovered too. All those efforts bore nothing though, and with the 5-year statute of limitation about to expire, that's the maximum time after which an event can be prosecuted. 4 people got indicted by a federal grand jury. 1 escaped, but then even the 3 that went to court were later acquitted. So it remains a mystery as to who was behind the robbery of what would be about $15 million in today's money. Rhode Island, the disappearance of Adam Emery. The case of Adam Emery is considered one of Rhode Island's most sensational murder cases just because of how bizarre things went down. So, on August 30th, 1990, at about 9 p.m., Emery, his wife Elena, and another couple had stopped for dinner at a local seafood stand in Newport when suddenly a car zoomed by and sideswiped Adam's car. The car in question sped away, but Adam was not about to let it go. He began a chase and eventually caught up with a Ford LTD, which he believed had caused the damage. He managed to get the driver to stop and immediately walked to the car. He took out a knife and began slashing the driver, 20-year-old Jason Bass. Then, one stabbed through the heart, and Bass's life was taken. Now, of course, Adam got arrested and the case went to court, but then the crazy part was that he got the wrong car. A paint test on the Ford LTD showed it had been in no way close to Adam's car. That didn't matter though, because either way, Adam had killed someone and was found guilty of—
Yeah, that's crazy. He doesn't even know what car it is, and he's just going after the first one he sees that he catches up with.
the crime of second-degree murder. Things got crazier though, because while out on bond and awaiting to go in for sentencing, Adam disappeared. His car was found on Newport Bridge with the lights on and the engine running, but neither he nor Elena were around. Elena's body would later be discovered in the Narragansett Bay, which sits 219 feet down from the Newport Bridge.
I'm pretty sure he just escaped in that case and he got away because clearly this is unsolved, so...
This led some to believe that the couple had jumped to their deaths, but then Adam's body was never recovered. He thus remains a wanted man by the FBI and is suspected to be somewhere in Italy. Connecticut. The graves of New Haven Green. Most people would probably never forget Hurricane Sandy. I mean, it was a quote raging freak of nature that led to about $70 billion in damages and 220 lost lives across the US and the Caribbean. Connecticut too felt the impact, but as if to top everything off, the storm unearthed a mystery, an age-old burial ground potentially linked to a pandemic from over 100 years ago. This all started when a 103-year-old tree, the Lincoln Oak, toppled over in central New Haven. Right beneath its roots were a skull, spine, and ribcage, and also a cement box. Initially, some thought this was a Halloween prank, but it turned out the bones were from the late 1700s, something also confirmed by a hand-wrought iron coffin nail from the 18th century. A further dig by an anthropologist from Yale, and the state's death investigator found 2 more facial bones from 2 different people. Now, the reason it's a mystery is because it's not known how those buried there ended up dying. The theory put forward by experts was that these shallow gates belonged to victims of a smallpox epidemic between 1775 and 1782, but then that's not for sure. Also, the actual number of people buried beneath the New Haven Green is a mystery. New Jersey. Missing bombs near Atlantic City. On July 28, 1957, an Air Force
Wait, what do you mean missing bombs? Those are 2 things that should not go together.
aircraft, the Douglas C-124 Globemaster, took off from the Dover AFB. It came from Delaware headed to Europe with a consignment of weapons, several nuclear bombs and 1 nuclear core. Shortly after the flight began though, the plane developed critical issues that caused both engines to lose power. Typical of such cases, an emergency landing was sought and the closest airport was determined to be Atlantic City's Naval Air Station. The problem though was that the plane, having no power, was descending far too quickly to make it to the landing station. The pilots realized this, and after consultation with the relevant authorities, they decided to drop some of the weapons. This is called jettison, by the way. So they jettisoned 2 missiles without the cores that make them radioactive. The first at 4,500 feet and the second one at 2,500 feet. Now, it's known for sure that the missiles landed somewhere off the coast of Atlantic City and never detonated. However, for some reason, they have never been recovered. Not even their debris was found, and what's even more concerning is that even though they didn't have the cores that usually cause them to be radioactive, they are still highly explosive. New York. Mayor of 2nd Avenue murdered. Popular among New York's mysterious murders is the case of Abe Lebuel, also fondly known as the mayor of 2nd Avenue. That's the title he'd earned from being a revered local business owner in the East 10th Street and 2nd Avenue area with a reputation for his generosity and good food. His services were apparently very indiscriminate, as he dealt with both the rich and poor, for instance, hosting big names like Jon Stewart and Muhammad Ali, while also ensuring the homeless people on the nearby streets were fed or didn't spend winter time out in the cold. It was such kindness that made Abe, a Holocaust survivor, not only achieve his American dream, but also win over the neighborhood. Now, unfortunately, Abe met his ultimate death on the morning of March 4th, 1996, when sometime before 9 a.m., as he sat in the deli's van outside the NatWest Bank where he'd gone to make a cash drop, someone accosted him, got in the van, dragged him to the back, and shot him 3 times. The killer took off with $12,000 in Abe's wallet. Abe managed to get out of the van and was taken to the hospital, but died an hour later. To this day, it remains a mystery as to who was responsible. That's despite the gun that was used, a .25 caliber Raven pistol, being found outside Central Park a day later. Pennsylvania.
That's insane. Like, that's actually insane. Never found. Never. No one knows. It's never been found. That's insane.
The boy in a box. According to 6 ABC News, one of the highest profile unsolved mysteries in Philadelphia history is the case where the body of a little boy was found in a box and dumped on the side of Susquehanna Road in Fox Chase. This happened in 1957, and despite extensive efforts by police officers in Philly, the boy remained unidentified. And also, rather sadly, no one came forward to claim the body. Even worse still, without much evidence to work with, the boy's killer had never been identified. The only positive note to the whole thing had been that in 2017, a historic historic marker was placed in Philly in honor of the boy, courtesy of Eagle Scouts and Vid OCQ Society. According to Nicholas Kirschbaum of the Scouts Troop 522, their hope in the marker was that it would spark interest in the case again and maybe bring in more leads. In 2022 though, 65 years later, while more leads never came in as Nicholas had hoped, the police were able to make a breakthrough in the case using modern DNA technology. Apparently, they uploaded his DNA to genetic databases and traced it back to the mother's side of the family. Finally, the boy had a name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He was born in 1953, which would make him 4 years old at the time of his death. And also, interestingly, he had 3 other siblings who might be alive today. The police, however, never released the mother's name out of respect for the 3 siblings. Now, all that said, a lot of mystery still surrounds the case, including who killed Zarelli and why. Delaware.
So you kept the mother's name. Have you contacted the siblings? Have you checked to see if they're still alive and contacted them? Let them know, hey, did you know your brother is dead? We found his body like 50 years ago. You know, a brother that went missing, you never knew where it went. Yeah, I figured out where he went.
John Jack Wheeler III in a dump site. This next one even got made into a Netflix documentary, Unsolved Mysteries. It's the case of John Jack Wheeler III, age 66, a well-connected figure in Washington political circles with high security clearance and working with Midtrade Corporation as a cybersecurity consultant. After a series of strange days, Wheeler had been found dumped at the Cherry Island landfill in Wilmington. His body had been aboard a garbage truck from miles away, Newark, Delaware. With little information as to what happened, theories immediately came up as to what caused his death. Some thought it was a hit for high.
Sorry, I feel so bad for yawning. It makes it feel like I'm not enjoying the video, which I am. I'm just very tired.
Due to his line of work. The coroner had confirmed homicide by blunt force trauma, although Wheeler had suffered a heart attack too. Others thought it was a robbery, but then his expensive watch, ring, and some cash were still on his body. Then others believed it was his bipolar condition that put him in harm's way. What's certain though is that he had been at his Newcastle, Delaware home on December 28th. That day, a neighbor reported attempted arson at a property adjacent to Wheeler's home, and strangely, Wheeler's cell phone was found at the crime scene. That started the series of strange days that I mentioned and included Wheeler reporting the next day that his phone, badge, key fob, and briefcase had been stolen at a burglary in his home. Anyway, he was last seen exiting the Namaur's office building in Wilmington before walking east into the high crime streets. Maryland. Where's Bradford Bishop? In March of 1972, Ronald Brickhouse, a ranger, went to investigate a bushfire just a few miles south of Columbia, North Carolina. What he found though were 5 smoldering bodies, 2 women, and 3 young boys. This was the beginning of a case that would later reveal 39-year-old William Bradford Bishop Jr., a former U.S. Foreign Service officer, as the killer behind several of his own family members: his wife, Annette Bishop, his mother, Mrs. Lobelia Bishop, and his 3 boys, William Bradford III, Brenton, and Jeffrey. They were all killed at their family home in Bethesda, Maryland, with the wife being the first victim, then Lobelia, and then the 3 boys who were bludgeoned to death as they slept in their upstairs bedroom. It's believed this took place moments after 7 p.m., with Bradford then piling the bodies in his 1974 Chevrolet station wagon, filling the tank, and driving 275 miles to a wooded swamp area in Columbia where he tried to burn and dump them. Now, what's weirder here is that after all that, Bradford completely vanished. He was never seen again. The Chevy wagon was found abandoned in Elkmont, Tennessee, 400 miles from where he dumped the bodies. Despite an extensive search and even having been on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, 47 years later, he's never been caught. West Virginia. Missing children after a fire.
Oh, it's them. The Sauter children. This one is insane and hilarious. It's insane because, like, this is an insane case. What makes it hilarious is Unsolved Mysteries from BuzzFeed. But and the guy and the insurance salesman who says your house is gonna go up in flames and your children are going to die, and Shane from BuzzFeed just goes like, well, we solved it. All right, it's been fun. Because apparently the insurance man would think, so if I remember correctly, he was never investigated, despite saying that. And I think he was part of something related to the case that made him have power in how the case was investigated.
For nearly 80 years, a fire incident that happened in Fayetteville, West Virginia has remained a mystery that no one is closer to solving than everyone who tried it back in 1945. The fire incident in question happened on the night before Christmas in 1945 when a house belonging to a couple, George and Jenny Sauter, burned to the ground and, rather unexpectedly, led to 5 missing children. That night, the couple had gone to sleep with their 9 children as usual, but then around 1 a.m., they were woken up by a fire in the house that was spreading quickly. They immediately got into action, trying to get everyone out, but by the time everything settled down, only 4 children were alive. Now, the expectation was that the other 5 would have been consumed by the fire, but then no remains were found at all. That was weird, but still, the fire chief, F.J. Morris, assumed the children had been burnt to ashes, like cremation, and so he just issued the death certificates. However, doubts persisted regarding those 5 kids, and although it took time, those in doubt were sort of vindicated because 20 years later, the mother, Jenny, received a photo in the mail. It was signed by Louis Sauter. Sauter was one of the 5 missing children from the fire and was age 9 at the time of the fire. So the question then became, where did the 5 children go after the fire? And did they all make it out alive? That is what remains a mystery. Virginia, Colonial Parkway murders.
There is so much that he went over in that case. There is so much missed. That was just a light touch on that, because there is so much he could go on.
Between 1986 and 1989, along the 22-mile Colonial Parkway near Yorktown, Williamsburg, and Jamestown, a total of 8 people got murdered by an unknown person, and 35 years later, the case remains only partly solved. The victims were all young people in their teens and 20s, and strangely, all 3 double homicide incidents then became, where did the 5 children go? Virginia. 22-mile Colonial Parkway near Yorktown, Williamsburg, and Jamestown, a total of 8 people got murdered by an unknown person, and 35 years later, the case remains only partly solved. The victims
I have no idea what happened there.
were all young people in their teens and 20s, and strangely, all 3 double homicide incidents involved couples. However, that might not be particularly strange because the location, Colonial Parkway, apparently had extremely long isolated stretches with no streetlights, which made it very popular among young lovers looking for some alone time. Now, when it comes to the causes of death, there was variation among the victims, with some being strangled, some stabbed, others shot, and some showing stab wounds. These differences were claimed to have made the police differ as to whether they were dealing with a serial killer or multiple killers. Regardless of the type of killer though, what was known was that most of the murders would take place in the lovers' cars, and interestingly, the killer or killers would then drive the vehicles away from the murder scene. Also, none of the victims showed any signs of SA. Now, like I said, this case is partly solved, and that's because in January of this year, authorities announced they were confident that 2 of the murders, those of David Knobling and Robin Edwards, could be linked to 33-year-old Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., a local fisherman and tree maintenance guy. Wilmer died in 2017 though, so he couldn't be prosecuted. As for the other victims, as it stands, it's still not known who killed them, how, or why they were killed. North Carolina, disappearance of a ship's crew. In late January of 1921, a schooner type of ship by the name of Carroll A. Deering made its way to the coastal region of North Carolina, and when spotted by the Cape Hatteras by a Coast Guard, it had been in perfect condition. It did, however, hit diamond shoals, which tore it apart. Strangely though, when the Coast Guard went in, there was no one aboard. It was completely empty despite having its sails set, there being prepped but untouched food, and everything else seemed in order. What made it weird also is that it wasn't on course. It had been heading to Norfolk, Virginia from Barbados. News about it spread fast, and the question then became why a crew of 12 would abandon a perfectly fine ship and leave absolutely no clues behind as to what went down. Speculations ran wild, with some saying it was attacked.
That is very interesting, because it's a normal ship. It's not broken or anything. It's a normal ship, perfect condition, that all 12 just abandoned. For no reason. Very odd. Very odd.
By pirates, others believing the crew had fought among themselves in a rebelling situation, while others pinned it on Russian spies. There was also a theory that the mystery has something to do with the Bermuda Triangle. In April of the same year though, things took a turn after a man found a message in a bottle on the North Carolina coast. The writing said, "Deering captured by oil-burning boats." That was taken to imply pirates might have had something to do with the crew's disappearance, but then it was never known for sure. It remains a mystery as to where the 12 went. South Carolina. On the Friday of May 16, 2003, in the town of Greer, South Carolina, a lady by the name of Sylvia Holtzclaw, a bank employee, had been alone inside the Blue Ridge Savings Bank just off Highway 58 when a couple, Ed and Margaret Barnes, walked in at around 1 p.m. About 30 minutes later, the police responded to a silent alarm, which meant a robbery had been in progress. Surprisingly, nothing was odd outside, and when they walked in, the bank was empty with no customers or employees. That quickly changed though, because as they walked down to the back hallway, they found 3 bodies: Sylvia the employee and the Barnes couple. They had been shot dead in the break room. Also, cash was missing from the cash drawer, and the VHS tape, which would have captured the entire crime, was also missing. This was the genesis of a very strange case where no real answer would ever come out.
That's an inside job. That has to be an inside job in some way. That person who did the robbery knew where the heck, knew how to get to everything.
At the time, the police had only managed to find some footage from a nearby gas station, and all it showed was a red car, an Oldsmobile Alero driving away from the bank around the time the robbery took place. Then, rather strangely, when they spotted an Alero with similar specs about 2 years later at a traffic stop in Georgia, the driver killed himself before he could be questioned. The case therefore remains unsolved, despite the standing reward of $100,000 for anyone with information that could help catch the killer. Georgia, the Bleeding House. In 1986,
I can't wait for Florida. Because Florida, you could do a whole video. You could do just one. You could do like 50 unsolved cases from Florida. Because Florida's got some insane shit. Florida is probably my favorite place to possibly live. Because it's batshit insane. And I'm meant to live there for that reason.
at the corner of Fountain Drive and Morris Street in southwest Atlanta, lived a couple, Minnie Winston, age 77, and William Winston, age 79. One evening on September 8th, just before midnight, Minnie, while stepping out of the shower, discovered spatters of blood all over the place. Bathroom, bedroom, kitchen, basement, and every hall. She called her husband, who was in bed, to come take a look, and then, concerned over what had really happened, they called the police. At first, homicide detective Steve Cartwright thought it was animal blood, but then they had no pets at all. The police also thought it was William's blood, as he'd been using a dialysis machine, but then his blood type, and Minnie's too, was A, while the one on the floor was O. With no solid direction of evidence, the case then began being clouded with mystery, and this was worsened by the fact that the blood was not submitted to the state lab while fresh. It couldn't be ruled out as either being from a human or an animal. The police never clarified if it was a hoax or a crime, and never mentioned anything else about where the blood came from. So as it stands, this remains an unsolved mystery. Florida. Mary Reeser's spontaneous combustion. How can a person go up in flames?
Okay, that's fair. That's fair, because this is insanity.
And look like they've just been cremated, while everything else around them in their house, including a stack of newspapers next to them, looks undisturbed. Well, that's the exact mystery in this next case, that of 67-year-old Mary Reeser. This happened more than 70 years ago in St. Petersburg, Florida, when on the night of July 1st, 1951, for what's considered no good reason, Reeser burned into a pile of ash. Yeah, you heard that right. She had been sitting on a chair in her apartment at the time of death, and the flame had consumed just her and the chair, nothing else. Well, except a few melted switches. The rest of the apartment was basically untouched. So the question then, considering cremation happens at around 1400 degrees Fahrenheit, was how would her body have reached such high temperatures in a short time and not destroy anything else? For most, the most reasonable answer was spontaneous combustion, a chemical fire starting inside the body by itself. The FBI though thought it was the wick effect, where an external source sets the body on fire, but the body's fat accelerates the burning and lengthens it. This was a plausible theory because it was determined that Reeser had told her son, Dr. Richard Reeser Jr., that she'd taken sleeping pills and a smoked cigarette before changing into a nightgown and going to bed. Despite the FBI's take, many remain skeptical, so there isn't really a conclusive explanation to what happened. I mean, someone even called the tip line to say a random fireball that flew in through the window was the cause. Alright guys, that was it for this.
Totally. Just happened, someone flew a fireball out of nowhere, and it happened to perfectly go through the window and hit her perfectly. That's exactly what happened. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this reaction video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all for the next one.